Today we have special episode number 90. Before we introduce our exceptional guest, I would like to announce that the main part of the conversation will be hosted by Kasia and Ola, and it will be actually the first ever episode actually without me. Yeah, and as always, we would like to invite you to listen to our traditional intro. Hello, my name is Maciej, and I would like to welcome you to charming Green Dragon Inn. Normally in our podcast, I prepare and tell you about interesting stories from Professor Tolkien's texts, as we analyze them together with my co-host.
Hello, I'm Kasia, and in addition to discussing parts of the books together, I support Maciej linguistically, especially when we discuss Tolkien's original writing or talk in English as today. I also do take care of the technical side of our podcast.
Hello, my name is Ola and I manage the social media of our podcast. Today I will be joining Maciej and Kasia as co-hosts to welcome our very special guest arriving at our inn from very far, far away.
The last member of our team is Nick Groom, who is responsible for all audio editing. The Green Dragon Inn is a friendly place for all travelers. Here you will be able to wander together with us through the immensely rich works of Professors John Ronald Reuel Tolkien.
Because we analyze his text a few paragraphs at a time in each episode, we delve into the history, interesting facts, and some humor. We also compare our native Polish translations of the professor works with each other or to the original text.
In our conversations, we rely heavily on already existing material, which forms a very sizable Tolkien's collection. That is the base of books on which we focus when preparing each episode. However, everything is done in a very inn-like manner, as a loose and casual conversation between us, and sometimes between our guests who regularly visit our inn.
If you want to learn more about our podcast, we encourage you to check out the episode number 0 or the trailer. There we talk a bit about ourselves and above all about the very form, inspiration and goals of our podcasting.
Take a seat in our inn under the Green Dragon, prepare yourself a pint of a good drink, and we begin our today's journey to Middle-earth.
Okay, today we are joined by Professor Nick Groom, a scholar of literature, cultural historian, and author of acclaimed works on Gothic literature, myth, and national identity. Known to many as the Prof of Goth, he's explored everything from vampires to British folklore.
And today, he brings his unique perspective to the world of Tolkien. He is the author of the book Tolkien in the 21st Century, which has been recently published in Poland by Insignis publisher. So let us welcome Professor Nick Groom. Professor, thank you for accepting our invitation. We are really excited for today's interview.
Hello, I'm really delighted to be here. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Yes, it's a great honor. Thank you so much again. And yeah, I think now we can move on to our traditional 5 questions, because whenever we have a special guest at our inn, we begin with those 5 questions and we're very curious about your answers. So I think we can begin now, right? So I think, sorry, Kasia, the first question actually mine.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, so for how long have you been reading Tolkien's books?
Okay, so I first encountered The Hobbit when I was at school, 8 years old, and there was a reading competition, and one of my classmates read out the first page, and I thought, well, this sounds good. I should get hold of a copy. And it was always out of the school library. There was always somebody else reading it. So it wasn't for a couple of years that I could actually borrow it from the library. So I must have been 10 years old when I read The Hobbit, and was captivated by it, as so many readers are. And then I subsequently read The Lord of the Rings, probably when I was about 13 years old, I think. That's a long time ago. And you can actually see the change in in the doodles I was making on my school books, which shift from cartoon characters to suddenly lots of Tengwar, Elvish script, and runes and so forth. So yes, it immediately absorbed my imagination.
That's amazing. So have you taught yourself some Tengwar and some Elvish characters and runes, or?
Yes, at the time when I was at school, I had a friend who was a couple of years older than me, and he showed me how to decode the alphabet.
That's amazing.
Yes, every bit of Elvish I could find, in the end papers of the books and so forth, I sort of carefully translated and then, used it as a code myself to send messages to my other school friends.
Okay, so it has been a lifelong journey for you, really, right? Beginning so early when you were 10 years old.
It has.
That's amazing. Like, for so many of us, I think that's incredible that, Tolkien is such a huge part of our life, right?
I mean, the thing was, I was very thrilled when I went to university because I was able to go to Oxford, which of course was Tolkien's university. But then I was very disappointed because I wasn't able to study Tolkien there. Things are changing now, but this was, in the 1980s, and the university didn't have much of a relationship with Tolkien and his works at the time. So there were no walks you could go on. There wasn't a special display in the bookshops or the libraries. It was very much sort of overlooked. To the extent that when I was a graduate student, I actually saw some of Tolkien's letters being sold in a charity shop.
Okay.
But I just couldn't afford them because I was, graduate students are.
Oh, no.
Right. But like actual letters, like original copies or
signed letters.
Wow, that would be great.
Remarkable.
Yeah, we 2 months ago, roughly, we spoke. We also did the interview with Ted Naismith, and he also had this kind of a story that he got actually a letter from Tolkien when he was at the beginning of his art career, but he never knew that it will be an important thing or worth something. So he just lost it.
Yeah, right.
When moving between like cities or something. Sure. But
it
having
lives
like
on
the
in
original
his memory now.
Yes, exactly. Who could have known back then?
Exactly. So really, although I wanted to study Tolkien, I wasn't able to do so. And then when I got my first academic job, I was very keen to teach Tolkien, and I was told by the head of department this was not going to be possible. So that went on for some years, and eventually I got to a position where I thought, well, I can teach what I want now. So that's when I first tried just teaching the Lord of the Rings on a course on English identity. This was many years ago, just to see how the students would respond, and it went so well that I then developed a whole course devoted to Tolkien.
That is amazing. I think we actually wanted to get back to it later in our interview, so because it's such a different, very exciting, I think, topic for all of us. So we will definitely get back to this question. Just a little follow up, because I'm very curious, because especially that you said it's such a lifelong thing for you. So since you're also a professor of literature, like Tolkien was, has Tolkien inspired you in any way to pursue this career and not, something completely different? Was he any sort of inspiration?
That's a really good question. I mean, I certainly enjoy teaching. I do get a lot of satisfaction from that. One of the things that also attracts me to an academic career is that it gives me time to write books. It's very difficult to make a living writing books, particularly in the UK. So I figured that it was a way in which I would have the opportunity to write. Even though I would have other responsibilities as well. But my particular areas of interest, they don't overlap very much with Tolkien, who has, worked very much on language and philology and so forth. Although, he did teach a lot of literature, but he doesn't really admit to it. He liked winding people up and mischief making by dismissing some of the great writers.
Yeah.
But I think that was just part of his sense of humour.
Right, yes. All right, thank you so much. That was very interesting.
Yes, that means my turn for my question. Professor, do you have a favorite quote or saying from Tolkien's works?
I think, probably the thing that I write in books is the line that Frodo says to Gildor, "The star shines on the hour of our meeting," which I think is rather poetic.
It is.
It's a nice thing when I meet readers or potential readers to just sort of note that particular moment. It's always a special moment.
It is, as you said, very poetic.
Especially when you teach, right? Because there you meet, like I said, a lot of fans, potential fans, potential people who could be interested. Cool.
Okay, lovely. So our next question is, which place or places in the whole Legendarium would you choose for your retirement, and why?
Yes, this is I don't think you're going to like my answer, because I think Middle-earth would be a great place to go and visit. But it's also a very dark place. It's full of, I think, sort of peril.
Definitely.
And it's also in decline. The Lord of the Rings is very much about, it's the end of the Third Age and the beginning, the loss of enchantment and so forth. So while I would want to visit, I wouldn't want to stay there. I think it would be very depressing. Not even in Valinor. I'm not an elf. I'd prefer to go to Dartmoor, which is where I live in England. And that does have actually a connection with Middle-earth. The artist, illustrator and Oscar winner Alan Lee is a neighbour of mine, and he bases many of his paintings of Tolkien's works on the landscape around Dartmoor. So
how lovely.
There is that connection. It's a wilderness that's covered in standing stones and sort of these ancient monuments. It has a very moody atmosphere to it. But yes, I'll certainly visit Middle-earth, but I wouldn't want to stay there.
Okay, I can understand that, since now we know that you kind of come from a part of Middle-earth, in our real world. So that's amazing.
As you say, Middle-earth is the end of Third Age, so all the great stories already happened, right?
Well, the thing is, really, when you look at the whole history of Tolkien's Middle-earth, things start badly and just get worse.
Yes, that is true. That is true.
As Galadriel said, it's a long defeat.
Yeah.
There are fruitless victories and many moments of despair.
That is true.
It's one of the reasons why, that's one of the reasons why I love the book. But it's not a book. It's not a comedy.
It's definitely not. Yes, so true.
But that's an interesting answer indeed, because we had a lot of ideas from our guests, including even canoeing on Anduin for like 3 months, or mountain trips into all the mountains.
I think Tom Bombadil's house, right?
Yeah,
someone says that. Yeah,
that's a very clever answer, because of course Bombadil doesn't really. He's only half in Middle-earth. He's one of those loose ends that seems to have come from another story. So yeah, that's a really good answer.
Okay, then let's move to the next one, which is also interesting. How many books written by Tolkien or about Tolkien do you have in your collection?
I've never actually counted them. So I'm currently working in Macau, so I don't have all of my books here. I just have the basic the works that Tolkien and his son Christopher prepared. But back in England, I've certainly got 2 bookcases full of the books. I was lucky enough to be able to get some of the early editions as well. So I do have a first edition of The Lord of the Rings.
Wow.
But these aren't first issue. So the first edition can go through different issues before it's reset. So they're not, worth tens of thousands of euros. But I do, having said that, I do have a first issue of The Return of the King, which is worth a lot of money. When I see these things in bookshops, I'm always inquisitive to see how much they're being sold for. And I think that they are, it's important to have, it's a real thrill to read The Lord of the Rings in one of those early hardback editions. It's a different experience to reading it in paperback or on a Kindle, not least because the maps are huge. the maps fold out at the back of the books, and they're printed in black ink and red ink. And it's much more of a sort of physical experience to actually handle the books in that way. And Tolkien himself, was instrumental in the design of even things like the dust wrappers and the boards, the hardback covers of the books. So you do sort of feel that you are getting a richer experience. The Lord of the Rings isn't just about the words of the story; it's the whole experience, I think, of handling.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, that must be, as you said, it's worth thousands of, dollars. I'm not sure what the currency should be, but it's at the same time, it's priceless, right? To have such a thing in your collection. So that's amazing that you have that, yeah.
I've also got a copy in which Alan Lee drew a picture for me. So he actually drew a picture of Gandalf on the end paper.
Oh, wow. Wow.
That's very special.
It's one of a kind copy in the world.
Yeah.
Okay, that's amazing. So so your collection must be, as I said, priceless and very precious. Amazing. Okay, so now I think we can move on to the last of our 5 questions. So that's, if you could choose one character to go on a quest to Mount Doom and destroy, or at least try to destroy, the One Ring, who would it be and why?
Well, I think it has to be Frodo and Sam, accompanied by Gollum. They manage it between the 3 of them. Not that Gollum is particularly pleased.
Yeah, doesn't end well for him.
He's the last one to be holding the ring, and Frodo fails. But he does get to the edge. And he wouldn't have got there without Sam. So yes. I certainly wouldn't choose anybody else. I don't think it would be a very good idea to have sent, Legolas or Gimli. It would have been interesting to have Aragorn to see whether he would fail like his ancestor Isildur did.
Yes. Yeah.
So I think it has to be hobbits. And I'd trust Frodo and Sam more than I'd trust Pippin.
Certainly, yeah.
Definitely. We were debating a lot about these questions with many of our guests because we heard already, for example, Glorfindel or Luthien or the
Didn't someone pick Gwaihir, I think, or one of the eagles? That was very clever.
Of course.
Yeah, just fly.
Yeah, it's an interesting idea, but then as soon as they leave Rivendell, Saruman seems to be controlling the skies, and then you get the Nazgul, their fell beasts.
Absolutely, yeah. We know that's the whole other vast topic of why didn't they just fly to Mordor? And yes, that there obviously are many reasons, but I just like that answer that someone gave. I think maybe someone on our social media was like, well, I would pick Gwaihir, I would just fly.
Keep flying, you run the risk of getting shot down. Although, of course, you could say, well, it's the last thing that Gandalf the Grey says, fly, you fool.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you so much for answering our 5 traditional questions that are in. I think now we could take a short break and we will move to the main discussion afterwards.
It's time for our self-advertising because at the beginning of this season, we have launched a profile on Patronite.
This means that every one of you can financially support our activities from now on. Consider if you are willing and able to join the group of our patrons. We offer you quite a lot in return, starting with a dedicated Discord channel, additional materials, or the opportunity to join us during the recordings as a listener and various gadgets and gifts.
So we invite you to join us on Patronite. Your support will help us not only maintain the level of our podcast, but rise it even higher. You will find links to our Patronite on our website. They will be also visible on YouTube and in other media.
But of course, you don't have to do anything, because the podcast will continue to appear in the same form as before, absolutely for free. After all, we are Tolkien fans, and we create out of pure passion.
We invite you to our Instagram and Facebook as well. There we regularly upload posts extending current episodes. Meanwhile, on our website, you will find links to all episodes along with footnotes and our library of books that we use to create the podcast.
We also encourage you to support us on all the channels where you follow us. Your likes, ratings, or reviews make us more visible. This means more Tolkien fans joining our inn,
And as a result, we have more interesting discussions, so don't hesitate to ask questions or comment.
Okay, so we are back now to our main discussion with Professor Nick Groom, and we would like to start with a couple of questions about where you currently live and work, because we think that's very something different, something probably very fascinating to our Polish listeners. So your current occupation is a professor of literature in English at University of Macau, and we are curious about some Tolkien fandom differences or similarities, maybe compared to, for example, England or Europe in general. Could you tell us how popular actually Tolkien is among students and readers in Macau, and is there a visible fandom, fan culture around his work?
Sure. So just in case your listeners don't know where Macau is, it's a special administrative region of China. I'm in a flat, and my flat overlooks the border with China. So I can see more of China than I can of Macau from my window.
Okay.
And I'm on what's called the Pearl River Delta. And Macau is a former Portuguese colony, and it's adjacent to Hong Kong, which was a former British colony. Mm-hmm. Well, I went to the museum shop the other day and bought this.
Monopoly! Lord of the Rings Monopoly. That's amazing.
And I also found one of these in a Balrog.
Oh, like a Balrog action figure? That's amazing.
So there is, there's the same level of enthusiasm, the same opportunity to purchase, souvenirs and merchandise. There's the same exposure, not only to the books, but to the films as well. The War of the Rohirrim was shown here in Macau over the Christmas period. There are some beautiful Chinese versions, illustrated versions of some of the books, which sadly, I actually bought some and then took them back to England because they're so unusual. And I imagine that there'll be more of those published. Certainly, and I actually do teach the same course that I was teaching in England here in Macau. So I've had over 40 students this semester doing my course on Tolkien. I've still got the essays to mark between that over the next few days. Certainly some of them are coming to it new. Many of them, like you find in the West, have perhaps only seen the films and haven't yet read the books. But the level of enthusiasm is very, very high. And so I'm getting the same response from students here that I was having in the West. And so the students, they do have things like rings.
The One Ring.
T-shirts with a tree of Gondor on them, costumes. There certainly is a cosplay and a live-action role-play culture here. And there's also not very far from Macau are the Philippines, and there's a Middle-earth theme park on the Philippines. We don't have that in Macau, but there is a permanent Harry Potter exhibition here. So it's a very sort of it reminds me, and I think that it's important to be reminded that this is a global phenomenon.
Absolutely.
It's not confined just to Britain or Europe or the West. It really is an international language, and it's really it's a very good reminder of that, to find the enthusiasm among the students here in Macau. In fact, one of the very first people to review my book when it was published in Britain was a resident of Macau. Who bought it to read on the plane, and he was returning to Macau, and he's since become a very good friend of mine.
And you mentioned that exactly you are having the same classes as you had already in England. And have you noticed any difference with, for example, themes that are resonating with students in Macau comparing to England, or any unique interpretations, or is it basically similar?
Well, that's a really interesting question. Many of the students here are very, very hardworking, and also maybe only have English as a second or third language. As a result, they also study a lot of linguistics. They're really fascinated in the language side. So I use my course to introduce them to Anglo-Saxon and medieval texts. And obviously we study those in translation, but I do spend some time on the language, on the Anglo-Saxon language, and we do read out the first few lines of the poem Beowulf in the original Anglo-Saxon, and they find that very, very interesting. So the fact that they probably speak, let's say, Mandarin or Cantonese and Portuguese and English, to actually see early English, Old English, and then see how that influences Tolkien's names and the development of his own languages, such as Elvish, is very, very interesting for them. They're also very visually literate as well. So they enjoy the film, the adaptations. I mean, we even watch The Rings of Power, they're completely up to date. They found the War of the Rohirrim particularly interesting because it appears to be appealing to a Southeast Asian, style of animation, that sort of anime.
Right.
It seems to be pitched more at that particular market, while making many references to all of the other visual adaptations. So, yeah, I've had some very, very good students indeed. Race and species comes up quite a bit, as well as you might expect. We're quite frank about that, how, the Peter Jackson films are very white in terms of the actors they've chosen, whereas The Rings of Power makes a conscious decision to cast sort of race blind. But this is something on which I've been working for a while. I've given a few papers about it. It's mentioned briefly in my book. I think that the whole notion of race in Tolkien has become confused because he's really talking about different species. You can't really say that elves are a different race of humans because they live forever. So they're completely alien. They're telepathic. They can walk across snow without leaving footprints. They are not like us. There are plenty of races listed among the human identities, as there are different races of hobbits as well. So I think we should be careful in our terminology. Really, but that is something which comes up when the students can talk about it very intelligently here. I'm very and they work very hard and produce good work.
That is very fascinating. I think our actually last question, you kind of began to answer that, because we were wondering if working in Macau has given you any new lens through which to view Tolkien or Gothic literature, which is your main area of focus, and has it given you any new perspective? So what you just said, that it's such a global phenomenon, right? That when you work and live so far away, it's probably like completely different. And I don't know, it's just so fascinating for me that, maybe we, when we live in Europe, we're just kind of, I don't want to say close to this like European, interpretation of Tolkien, because obviously in the era of like the internet and globalization, we do know a little bit, but it must be completely different for you just actually living there. So has it given you any even broader perspective, would you say, on Tolkien?
Yes, I think the point about sort of the international nature of the phenomenon is really important, and it does tend to underline one of the things that I argue in my book, is that we can't separate what Tolkien wrote from the whole, phenomenon, the whole industry, in terms of film adaptations, merchandise, games, podcasts as well. It's all part of the sort of Tolkien universe now, and I think it's important to see it as a whole, rather than just select one bit and pretend you can look at that on its own. You can't. You have to look at the whole lot. But it has made me more sensitive towards issues of race and difference and discrimination, and so I will be publishing a piece about that when I finished it. But it's I want to get it right, and it's going to be, I hope, an important contribution to these discussions.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And it's also, for me, it's fascinating how different adaptations, for example, or books or podcasts, like you said, are also influenced by the time we live in. Because now, obviously, the race and minorities are... The discussion about it is in mainstream, right? We think about it. So obviously it's also visible in the adaptations of Tolkien, like Rings of Power or others. But it wasn't there like 20 years ago because it wasn't also discussed. That's really interesting. And I always wonder how it will evolve, like in the next 20 years, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it will, and it's not something you can really turn your back on. I mean, although the Rings of Power came in for a lot of criticism, I'm personally a fan of it because I think you have to judge things on their merits. And they had sort of a very limited number of sources they could use, but they wanted to contribute something different. And I think it's a very effective, so far it's been a very, very interesting and effective series. And I don't really want to turn my back on that. I think, we should look for how it's developing the characters, particularly the character of Galadriel in The Rings of Power it's a brilliant portrayal of somebody who is a rebel, but also extremely arrogant with this enormous sense of entitlement and a sort of genocidal hatred of orcs. It turns into a really complex character, but you can see the seeds of it there in the Galadriel of The Lord of the Rings. And had Tolkien lived a lot longer, he would have developed Galadriel in the Legendarium as well. I mean, she was a late revision to that.
Yes.
It's really thinking about The Lord of the Rings and how the character has such presence in that book that he wanted to go back and start revising the Legendarium to place this character in a central role. And I think The Rings of Power is, in part, taking up that challenge. However, I have been trolled online for defend The Rings of Power.
Yeah, definitely.
I did watch it, and it's not something I will be coming back to because I'm also not really this fan of the series. I think I watched two series in my life, but it was nice to see the next adaptation. And when the new seasons will come, I will definitely watch them. I did like a few, some parts. I didn't really enjoy a few, but it's. I think it's interesting, and I will definitely watch the next ones.
Well, the thing is, as the Peter Jackson films led many people to read the books, the same thing is happening with The Rings of Power.
Yes, exactly.
I know people back in the UK who enjoyed The Rings of Power seasons 1 and 2, and then are now saying to me, "Oh, yes, I must read the book."
Yeah,
and I say, well, the book's very different, but I think you'll enjoy it for different reasons.
It even, because my sister is reading a bit of different kind of books, but she also watched that with her partner, and it actually provoked me and her to talk about Tolkien, to discuss every episode. And I was explaining, no, it wasn't like that. This is the whole story. And I think at the end she was tired of me going into all the details. But it provoked the conversations we wouldn't have if the series is not here. Yeah,
right. That's one of the merits of The Rings of Power. Even if you think, even if I think you really dislike it, but you cannot deny the fact that, as you guys said, it opened this new room for more conversation, and a lot of people are turning to Tolkien's books through it. So that's good.
I think it's also a generational argument. I think for younger readers and viewers, The Rings of Power is really exciting because it's happening now, and they haven't got other people telling them about what they've missed, basically. Certainly for my daughters, I mean, they're very keen on Tolkien, but they like The Rings of Power because they feel that it belongs to them. It's their generation.
Yeah, good point.
Yes. And now let's, you already mentioned, and we are slowly getting to that, to your book, because like we said, it recently was translated into Polish, so it also got a lot of new readers. And we wanted to ask, how long did it take you to gather all materials needed for the book, and how did you divide it? Did you write in stages? So did you analyze books first, and then movies, and then music, or was it something that evolved as a whole in your mind?
It was written under very difficult circumstances because it's a pandemic book. Except I'd make a point at the end saying it's not a pandemic book, but it was written during the pandemic, and it obviously does. It inevitably bears, the scars, if you like. But I didn't intend to write it as a pandemic book. I had been teaching Tolkien at the University of Exeter for some years, so it had been at the back of my mind, and I was talking to my publisher, and it really came about in conversations between me and my editor, James Nightingale. He's an excellent editor at Atlantic, and I actually wrote. I just sat down and wrote it in the order in which you read the chapters.
Okay.
It was very hard work, but I was fortunate to have the materials to hand, and I had a very clear idea of what I wanted to argue. Having said that, I didn't include everything. There was a chapter on the Silmarillion that I ended up cutting from the book because I don't think it would have fitted really. It would have diverted from the main point about treating the adaptations with respect, as well as the written work. But it really was a case of there's no. I say to people, there's no secret in writing books. You just sit down and write them.
Yeah, true. Okay, and in your book, Tolkien in the 21st Century, you explore how Tolkien's work remains very relevant until today. Do you recognize any urgent or overlooked aspects of his legacy in our current times? Something from his legacy that we overlook right now?
Yeah, certainly. As I was writing the book, my admiration for Tolkien was, renewed. I think he's a very neglected writer, not because people don't read him, because in terms of sort of academic appraisals, they tend to focus on the language and linguistics, the sources, things like that, rather than just talking about his qualities as a good writer. So this book is partly about the value of literature. Why do we read literature? What does it bring to us? Are we looking for a story, for characterization, for solutions to problems? Well, it's almost, I think that the best books and poems and plays are like sort of laboratories where you can conduct experiments and you can put characters in particular situations and see how they react. And The Lord of the Rings does that in fantastic and very sophisticated ways. And one of the things that I find, disappointing is some people think it's just about good and evil, and we know that good's going to win. It's not at all. It's very much about failure and uncertainty, and having ways of looking at the world that don't fit together. And brilliant as Tolkien is as a world builder or a sub-creator, as he would describe himself, his real skill is in not explaining things, in leaving lots of loose ends, because we can't explain everything in the world that we live in. We don't have answers for everything. And lots of people have different opinions, and often those don't, coincide at all. And I think Tolkien is very good at representing that. The fact is that, there aren't answers, there aren't clear answers. There's a good example is there providence or fate or chance or luck? Well, different characters have different ideas about it. Yeah. And it's not quite clear what's going on, and he doesn't. And we were talking about Tom Bombadil earlier. Where does he come from, and where does he go? What's he doing there? He's a deliberate loose end. I think he's inexplicable. Even characters such as Treebeard. Everybody loves the Ents. Everybody loves trees. Well, Treebeard's completely unreliable. He lets Saruman go, which leads to terrible problems for this.
True, yeah.
But it also, I mean, he's some readers sort of consider the Ents to be very wise, but he's never heard of hobbits. Hobbits are the one of the sort of major species of the Third Age. So, even a character like Treebeard, who's very old, doesn't have a complete picture. It doesn't have a full vision of what's going on. And I think that's one of the qualities that I really wanted to get across in writing the book, because that's one of the reasons why you go back to it, because. It gives you the space to think. It doesn't tell you what to think. It gives you room to think around these questions. And I think that the best adaptations do that as well.
I love what you said. Yeah, that Tolkien gives us room to. He doesn't tell us directly what to think, but he gives us this room to kind of interpret it for ourselves and have all those amazing discussions. So yeah.
Yeah, but I think that sort of things like this podcast and the whole, realm of Tolkien fandom are really sort of proof for that. But I just want the conversations to remain sort of open and respectful. Really, I think that's important.
Yes,
and with the writing skills of Tolkien, what you said, actually, when I'm preparing to every episode we record, I'm reading the part of the text of Lord of the Rings currently that we will be analyzing, and every single time I'm caught in reading like forward. Like that, I'm not stopping where I'm supposed to end, because the storytelling, and I want to know. I read it 10 times already, but still, I want to read it once again. And I think this is, of course, it's a skill to write text in this way, right?
He's a brilliant storyteller, and aspects of his style have not really been analysed sufficiently. There's so many different voices in The Lord of the Rings, different ways of writing, and also characters telling stories themselves. Tom Shippey, the great sort of Tolkien scholar, has pointed this out in The Council of Elrond, where he just introduces more and more characters who all speak in a particular way and have their own stories to tell. There are very few writers who can handle that, and it's a huge undertaking. It's one of the longest books of the 20th century.
Yeah.
And yet all of the characters are recognisable, three-dimensional. They all change. I think that's really. It's endlessly fascinating.
Absolutely. I think the Council of Elrond chapter that you mentioned is like a huge testimony to Tolkien's skill in writing, because what you just said, it's basically a huge conversation chapter, right? The characters just speaking, and yet it's one of the most, I think in my opinion, one of the best chapters in the whole story, because it's just so fascinating and you learn so much and you see those dynamics between characters. So yeah.
It's like the whole world unfolds in front of you during that chapter. You suddenly realise, just how extensive Middle-earth is, and there are sort of histories and politics and memories and artifacts and the whole landscape. So it's I find it's a very, very powerful passage in the book.
Yeah, there could be an adaptation only about the Council of Elrond, I think.
I would watch that.
My next question is exactly about adaptations, the cinematic ones and also the online fandoms you mentioned. Do you think, and I think I can guess the answer, but I will ask anyway, do you think the popular culture has reshaped our reading of Tolkien for better or worse? What do you think?
I would say for better, because it involves more people. And that's one of the things I didn't want to write this book as a Tolkien purist. I learned early on when I was teaching Tolkien that, you can't have a law that says you've got to read the books first and then watch the films. That's just sort of crazy. So you have to accept that people have got many ways of coming to the books, and that might be through computer games, through things like the radio adaptation on BBC, which is actually a brilliant adaptation, or through role-playing games and so forth. I think that it's important to really embrace that and see that as a strength rather than as a fault. I mean, to take an analogy. You look at the number of times that Shakespeare plays have been staged and adapted and rewritten, reworked, and so forth. And it's, it's a testimony to the power of the original that you can do that.
True.
And so you have to see that, the seeds of those later versions are already there in the original. And that's one of the things we can celebrate. You can't do it with everything.
Yeah, the only fault I can think about when it comes to the popular culture influence is that in the popular culture you have the good ones and the bad ones. So the good and bad fighting together, and you always have this Barad-dûr in your head that these are the bad ones. And if you would be in the situation that you read Lord of the Rings first time in your life and you go chapter by chapter, it's not that black and white, because you have the Old Forest, then you
Absolutely.
have Tom Bombadil, and it's not like you said at the beginning, only good fighting with evil. It's a lot of mixed plots and stories in between, and I think that part is a bit hurt of the popular culture, because, like I said, we all see this Barad-dûr Tower and the Great Eye.
There's a tendency, or maybe a temptation, if you're having popular adaptations, to simplify it. That's just inevitable.
Yes, yes.
But you're simplifying something which, when you return to it, you can recognise its complexity, and really enjoy that.
Yeah, well said. Okay, and our next question, I'm very curious, because you have already mentioned that there is a themed part in Macau, in the Philippines, right?
Philippines,
yes. So perhaps you've heard about the plans that they want to build a universal themed Lord of the Rings park in England soon. So do you think such parks could actually also be seen as some sort of adaptation? And how do you personally feel about this idea to build one in England?
It's very interesting, because the one that's been proposed in England is actually the site is a town called Bedford, which is where I went to school. So
okay.
So it's where I grew up. So I'm delighted. I can't wait to go and visit it myself. And I know that area very well. And you're quite right. Yes, things like theme parks are a form of adaptation. I don't know whether they're a form of adaptation that I'm really qualified to be able to analyse, but they are going to engage, the visitors in different ways. I don't have great experience of theme parks. I have been to Disneyland in Hong Kong with my children, and we all had a great time. You have sometimes you just have to hang your prejudices, on the sort of, you have to leave them in the cloakroom, leave them at the gate, really, and you just enjoy these things for what they are. They are, sort of visually very stimulating. The rides can be very thrilling, and it's a day out. It's a moment of escapism. And while I don't think that particularly The Lord of the Rings is a particularly escapist book, it's just adding another little sort of aspect to that experience. So, I wouldn't complain. I know that with the minute this theme park is open, all my friends and family will want to go.
Yeah, definitely. I would also go, dressed as an elf.
That would be fun, yeah.
And is there already a date where they want to, a few years, right?
It's 2031, I think, so it won't be for 2 years.
So we need to wait.
And yes, it'll generate great debate, and people think it's good, people think it's bad.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's important that we have these discussions and work out, why we think things are good or bad, and how we make these judgments. So it will stimulate, I think, an interest in this culture.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
And let's go back to the book for a moment. So I wanted to ask, what surprised you the most in the process of writing the book, and the process of Tolkien how the book was created by him. For me, it was reading about and learning about the earliest script where the story was different. So, for example, when Galadriel seduces Frodo, and lots of other incredible things happen. Not even mention like changing the names of the characters to something what it then means at the end something else. So, was there ever a moment where you saw Tolkien's work in a completely new light from his like creative process?
Yeah, I mean, although I'd read the History of Middle-earth volumes, until you actually sort of sit down and try to construct your own narrative of this, I hadn't realised just, first of all, quite how little idea Tolkien had about what he was doing. He had a map, but he didn't have a plan. And he just sort of explores the map. And there's this wonderful letter when he's sort of, a friend has asked him how the new book's going. He said, well, it's got hobbits in it. And these fellows have turned up, these black riders. I don't know who they are or where they're from.
Yeah.
So, this sort of more broadly, the fact that Tolkien, he discovers, he explores. He's not writing to, a predetermined sort of plan that he's worked out all in advance. And so that's one of the things I hadn't really appreciated the extent of that. The other thing was I hadn't really appreciated just how busy Tolkien was when he was writing it. He was unbelievably busy, huge demands on his time. And that's one of the reasons it took such a long time to finish. But he was, a really industrious, driven individual, and contributed to so many areas that it's a real sort of salutary lesson, I think. And then, yes, the whole then question of adaptation, which the bittersweetness of Tolkien finally making some money, because he spent many of his years with very little money trying to raise 4 children. With his wife Edith, and then when he finally does make some money, when the American paperback, after a pirated edition, tries to steal the market, he then gets hit with a huge tax bill. And so it all comes too late for him, really. So there is a sort of a sadness, a melancholy about this story. It's, it should have come much sooner, so we could have enjoyed the fruits of success.
Yeah.
In much more comfort. So I just find it sort of very moving to learn about his life through the process of him, writing the book and trying to finish the Silmarillion. So that's one of the reasons why I do spend some time on his biography in the opening parts of the book, because I don't think that comes across in the same way in some of the other biographies that have been written. I think it's an important part of the story to see what pressures he was under. So that's sort of those are 3 things that I. But at the end of the day, as I've already said, it's just realizing that this is a great work of literature, and it should be counted as that. It should be sort of seen to be, one of the major artistic achievements of the 20th century. And
absolutely,
I feel that was, really proven by the research that I did for it, and then that I continue to do today. He's a great writer.
Definitely, yeah. I really like that you included in your book what you just described, how difficult it was for Tolkien to actually be able to finish his story, and this sort of unspoken comparison between Frodo's journey and Tolkien's journey to finish. I think not many people realize that, and I really like that. Maybe our listeners will read your book and actually realize, how fascinating that is, that we even got the Lord of the Rings, and that we can enjoy it in the end.
But it was, there was so many setbacks and obstacles he had to overcome. It's remarkable he continued with it, and I think one of the reasons was the encouragement of C.S. Lewis. I think that he was a great supporter during those years. We have the Lord of the Rings, but sadly we don't have any other of Tolkien's finished novels.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, The Hobbit is a children's book, and it's sort of and how comfortably it fits with the Lord of the Rings we could debate that for hours.
That's true. Okay, so in your book and during our conversation, of course, you repeat that you approach Tolkien's works and adaptations without any prejudice or hierarchy. I think that is a great approach. However, we cannot help but be curious about your very personal opinion. Are there any changes in Peter Jackson's adaptations that you perhaps do not enjoy personally, or maybe some changes, completely different from the book that you think were a great idea?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I think that when I first heard that Peter Jackson was making a movie of Lord of the Rings, I thought, I don't want to see this. I'm not interested. I'd also seen the Ralph Bakshi version, which has a very mixed response. That was until I saw a documentary on BBC television before the films had been released, and I was amazed at the spectacle that this was. I realised that this was going to be a film that portrayed what was unimaginable. Through the use of his use of sort of CGI, it was going to be a real cinematic experience. So I changed my mind and went, and of course then absolutely enjoyed it. I think Peter Jackson and his co-writers, Fran Walsh and Philippa Bones, were very astute in the changes that they made, and the changes are massive. A lot of viewers and readers don't realise just how big the changes are, because they are in the spirit of the book. And they capture the tone and the atmosphere in many instances. And so they don't appear to be incongruous or awkward. But, Peter Jackson did make major changes, and he often relied on the Ralph Bakshi version, I think. And if you watch them side by side, you can see that the phrasing, the editing, even tiny details get carried over. There's nothing wrong with that, because it's not just an adaptation of the book, it's an adaptation of the earlier versions as well. So there's a whole, adaptation tradition. The thing that did both surprised and disappointed me was the not having the scouring of the Shire. Because we get a glimpse of that in the Mirror of Galadriel in the Peter Jackson version. And when I watched it, I thought, great, they're not going to shy away from that. They're going to face this sort of final, catastrophe, but we don't get it. And I remember as I was watching the final movie in the cinema, the dawning realization that there wasn't enough time.
Right?
Have the scouring of the Shire. The reason I think that it's an important chapter is it really sort of emphasizes the point that you can't go home. Once you've left, you can't return, and everything will be different. And you just have to hope that it's not as bad as the hobbits discover things to be. And that really underlines the fact that sort of Frodo, of all of them, can't go back, and he has to leave Middle-earth in the end. So I hope that, with the investment that's being made in terms of, films like The Hunt for Gollum, for example, that there will be an opportunity for a filmmaker to have a go at the scouring of the Shire as a standalone episode. I think it'd be really interesting to do. And it's also, it shares so many features of other writers of the 1930s and 40s, writers like George Orwell, who also have this sort of sense of, decline. And, the end of things isn't just the end of empires and the end of, sort of species leaving Middle-earth. It's the homely stuff. It's the little things. It's the everyday that has a real, that really pulls on your heartstrings, I think. And I think it's a really powerful ending to a novel that already has about 6 different endings, and it's the one that you don't see coming, and that means that you do sort of keep reading. quite aghast, really. It's a very brave way to take them home.
Definitely. I think that's what you mentioned, Kasia. I'm sorry that you mentioned, the simplification of evil versus good, and this ending in the movie is also, I think, an example of this simplification. It's more hopeful, perhaps, but as you said, it doesn't show this depth that war will reach, home, and you cannot really go back to your home as it was, that it doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah. I mean, the end of the movie is like this sort of long coda to, congratulate the audience for sort of having watched
3.5.
And it's sort of like, yes, it's sort of tearful, but it's also, it's like a long cadence at the end, whereas in the book things are very different.
Yes, and is there something else? Beside this part missing in the film, is there something else or a popular interpretation in the books that irritates you of Tolkien's works in the culture?
Nobody's really had the courage to portray Tom Bombadil. It's only recently in The Rings of Power, in the second season of The Rings of Power, Tom Bombadil does turn up. But he is cut from nearly every other adaptation, both on film and radio. He briefly appears in the American radio version, I think. But that's one of the worst radio adaptations. So it would have been interesting. I don't see how he could have fit in with the Peter Jackson vision. But he's a character about which, again, a sort of, I'm sure he's going to turn up in The Hunt for Gollum. I'm sure
that would be interesting.
Yeah.
Because that's a whole chapter of the world. Well, more than that. I mean, you've got the Barrow Wight as well. You've got the Old Forest. There's that. Those chapters could all be part of The Hunt for Gollum.
They could, yeah. That would be very interesting to see how they approach the story. Indeed.
And it would also be very, it would remain faithful in some ways to what Tolkien himself had written. So there are definitely sort of rich sources that could be capitalized on.
Absolutely. Okay, so our next question comes from our missing host, Maciek, who was here for the beginning, because this is a topic very close to his heart. He is curious about the musical inspirations in your books. So he wanted to ask you if you actually had the opportunity to listen to all of the albums, all of the songs, that you listed in your book back to back. And is there a music genre that you prefer, that's your favorite?
Well, I did notice that he was wearing a Fender guitar T-shirt, so
every day.
He's a musician.
The same with Nicodem, who is editing. He's also
right. There is a huge body of music that's inspired or alludes to Tolkien, and I was awestruck when I sort of came across one of the websites that just lists it. It would take a lifetime probably to listen to it all. But I did listen to the ones that I mentioned, some of which I enjoyed more than others. I found sort of the two extremes. You've got Cirith Ungol, which is a death metal band. Right. Which I just had that on in the background rather than on the headphones. And you've got Jack Sangster, who does these sort of jazz interpretations, which are bizarre, frankly. And Leonard Nimoy, who played Mr. Spock in Star Trek, does this hilarious ballad of
Bilbo Baggins song, yeah.
I mean, the ones that I really prefer are, I do sort of talk about the rock band Led Zeppelin, who I think were much more influenced than they care to admit. And I've certainly argued that Stairway to Heaven, even though the singer Robert Plant says it's not about Middle-earth, it clearly is. It's clearly about Middle-earth. It almost, quotes lines from the book, as well as having many of the shared images. So that would, I think, be the song that would most represent it. And it's also on an album that references ring wraiths and also Misty Mountains. So they're event, and they're also on their second album. They refer to Gollum, for example. So I think that they're a band that have a clear influence, but they are able to adapt it to suit their particular style, which I very much enjoy.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah, it's interesting how many, like you said, different kinds of music are inspired by Tolkien, because we have like from death metal bands to opera, movie music. So I think it was recently announced that there will be an official Lord of the Rings opera in September.
Yes, there's also been a musical
exactly.
which I think is touring in the US at the moment. Yeah, but there's a classical repertoire. There's some really good classical adaptations, and as you said, the soundtrack, the Howard Shore soundtrack, is absolutely gorgeous. So it's a wonderful piece of music, which is anybody who can sort of play an instrument has had a go at playing some of those themes.
Yes. As a part
I'm completely not a musical person, but I remember a couple of years ago, I really wanted to try. I got myself a thin whistle, and I taught myself to play the beginning of Concerning Hobbits, and I was able to do that, but that's about it. But as you said, everyone wants to have a go at this soundtrack.
Okay, we mentioned a lot of the upcoming things, so like Hunt for Gollum, next seasons of Rings of Power that are coming. So, Professor, are you planning or maybe already gathering material for another update of your book with those new titles, new interpretations coming? Do you plan to do that?
Well, funnily enough, I've been in contact with my publisher because I want to discuss that with the people at the press, but we've been rather busy discussing the things like the translation for the Polish edition. So we haven't talked about having a third edition of the book. I should say about first of all, I don't speak Polish, so I've got no idea how accurate the translation is. I'm sure it's absolutely, legitimate, but I wasn't consulted on it, so I don't know. So I'd be interested in your opinion about if you can compare it with an English version, which I can always send you one. It's interesting that I'm just part of that process. I haven't sort of had a chance to really contribute any further. The first English version was then republished in an updated version with an extra chapter on the Rings of Power, because originally the book came out at exactly the same time that the Rings of Power was broadcast, so there was no way of including it except in a few pieces of publicity. I then wrote an afterword about the first season of the Rings of Power. So I hope that that's available in the Polish edition. It's also republished by the Tolkien Society, so it's available there, because I just thought it was fair that people should have access to it. And I would like to do, an updated third edition. The problem is the book's already nearly 500 pages long,
right?
So it would just be difficult to actually print at that length. So I wanted to have a discussion with them to see what they think would be the best way of approaching this.
Right.
In the meantime, so I'm writing a piece about race and species. I've just written a piece for the Oxford Handbook of Tolkien, which is about Tolkien's use of contemporary 20th century writers. And I've got a few other ideas for articles or shorter pieces.
Okay.
So there's sort of plenty of opportunity, but the nice thing to do would be to follow up 21st century Tolkien with a deep dive into this sort of whole new world of adaptation. And I think I could do more on the things like the computer and video games as well, for example. So there are definitely opportunities. It's whether a book is the right format for that. I mean, maybe it would be better to do, to actually make a video where you can actually show clips. But that all remains to be seen.
In my professional life, I actually work in video games industry, so there is definitely a potential, because now there are a few games like from Lord of the Rings with Lothra as a phenomenon for 34 years, but the recent one, the Gollum game, wasn't a big success. So let's call it this
that's
way.
Interesting. Right,
So there is potential for that. And when it comes to Polish translation, I think it's of your book, I think it's pretty good, and also with yes, and with in Polish we have three different free translations of The Hobbit and three translations of Lord of the Rings. So there is a lot of research already, and also a comparison between all the translations we have. And we have really skilled translations that are specialists in Tolkien already. So I think all of that research was also visible in the current translation of your book, for example. I don't know, what do you think, Ola?
Because of course I haven't actually seen a copy of the Polish translation.
I don't have. I have
it in the other room. I can show you at the end of our interview.
Yeah, but the book itself is also published. The cover and everything. It's really beautiful.
Beautiful.
I'm really looking forward to seeing it, and I have been in touch.
Okay, I'll show it to you after. Yeah, I don't want to leave it.
They're really nice people, so I will be seeing it in the next month.
I just wanted to add to what you said, Kasia, that I think the Polish translation of your book, the Tolkien, the 21st Century, into Polish, it's like a true labor of love, because both the translator and the editor are huge Tolkien fans. And actually the editor, Joanna Rozmus, is a friend of mine. She's also a part of our Discord group. Yes, so she was actually
I'm very, very grateful.
All right, I'm sure she will be listening to us. So yeah, thank you, Ashko, because she was actually the person who came up with this idea that, the Insignis publisher should maybe acquire, the rights to this book, and we should publish it.
Lovely.
And that's amazing that it happened, because we have so many, Tolkien fans in Poland who want to read and learn more about Tolkien. So yeah, I can confirm that the translation is really, really good.
That's really lovely to know. I'm very, very grateful. So please, as I say, thank her. And I hope to meet her. Of course.
Okay, and we have the last question when it comes to adaptations, because you're on the podcast right now. So what is actually your opinion about podcasts about Tolkien's work? Because, well, it might not really be a typical form of adaptation, not really, but it is a strong branch of entertainment. Yeah. We have lots of different branches, like some more serious ones, like Corey Olsen, or some more relaxed forms, like our Inn at the Green Dragon and more. So, what do you think about this way of sharing passion for Middle Earth?
I think it's great. I think that podcasts are definitely adaptations, and they are extremely significant ways in which sort of fans and people perhaps just with a passing interest can actually form communities. So I think that they're a very valuable part of the sort of the Tolkien phenomenon. At the same time, I think that as podcasts, become more popular, things like, media like national radio is less listened to. And so you don't get that sense of people accidentally finding an author or a musician or a performance. The great thing about radio is you're not quite sure what's going to come up. Whereas if you tune in to a particular podcast channel, you know that it's going to be about Tolkien or Harry Potter or Star Wars or French classical music, or about Cubist art or something.
Right.
So I think that it's important that there's an element of the unexpected, and that's one of the ways in which we can discover culture and history without having a plan of what we're going to do. And I think that sort of national radio and television used to be a way of introducing people to new cultural experiences, and that perhaps is being slightly challenged by podcasts. But all in all, podcasts are great, and they allow a much wider range of opinion, I think, and it's a democratization of culture, which is very interesting.
Right. Okay, great. Thank you.
Yes, and now I wanted to ask you one last question about your teaching, because you used to teach and you mentioned that at the beginning, that was the only undergraduate on one of the first undergraduate courses in Britain on the works of Tolkien. It's something that we would all, I think, absolutely love to attend back in our university years. And what was the student response like? Were there any surprising reactions or discussions that stood out to you? Was it when it was announced, was it a popular course on the university? What was the reaction?
Yeah, so actually I first taught Tolkien, I think, when I was at the University of Bristol in the UK. But this course really developed at the University of Exeter. And there was certainly a shift. When I started teaching it at the beginning of the 21st century, the students would have all read the books before seeing the movies. Then there was a noticeable shift where they were coming to the books after having seen the movies, and then a further shift where they were joining the course having seen the movies but not even yet bought a copy of the books. So I did sort of make it, but then that's one of the reasons, that's one of the inspirations behind the book that I've written. It's you shouldn't criticize people for that. You should have seen that as part of their encounter with Middle Earth, and it's as I said at the beginning, there are different ways in. So it did mean that the course had an increasing emphasis on adaptation, and that's obviously continued at Macau with the Rings of Power. But as I also I think sort of mentioned in passing, this is also, of course, it's trying to encourage them to think about early writing in English. So Beowulf, The Wanderer, The Seafarer, The Battle of Maldon, Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. Poems that might just be titles to students, but which, if they read them and study them and think about them, they will sort of see as a very rich tradition and history. And so I do want to try to demystify those for them and get them to feel comfortable in approaching a great poem like Beowulf, and not just do it through the Seamus Heaney translation, but actually think about other ways in which it can be presented.
Right.
So in that sense, I didn't want the course just to be, let's get a load of Tolkien fans together and talk about whether a Balrog has wings or not. I wanted to see Tolkien in a series of cultural traditions, the most important of which is, the sort of northern Anglo-Saxon and Norse tradition of those works, but also then connecting with other writers as well. And that's one of the things it's really rewarding to introduce students to a major text that they haven't even perhaps heard of, particularly in Macau, and then to see them writing about it and thinking about it. And the other thing is, you've got to sort of make these things fun. We had a great experience earlier this semester where I took all my students out of the classroom and we reenacted the Battle of Maldon.
Oh, wow. Must have been amazing.
So, yes, I'd asked them all to make weapons, and some of them did dress up.
Oh, wow.
And so we did have a reenactment. And it's also a way of then introducing what we were talking about earlier in terms of, gamifying Tolkien, but also, his influence on role playing and cosplay and so forth. We don't just sort of sit in the classroom. We do go out and do things.
That's awesome. I love this approach. What you said, that to not only study Tolkien but also make it fun. Like that's how I've always approached Tolkien.
Right,
well,
yeah.
There are so many, Lord of the Rings is clearly a very sort of serious book. At the same time, it's full of games and puzzles and riddles, and it does have a rich sense of humour running through it.
Yes, Tolkien's sense of humour is so, sometimes underappreciated, but it's so brilliant.
Yeah, you're quite right. It is underappreciated. And there's this, this sort of constant sense of mischief as well, which is one of the things I like about him. He keeps you on your toes.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, that made me miss my university years. I wish I could attend your course on Tolkien.
Well, you asked about podcasts earlier. I'd love to have my own podcast channel, but I just don't have time at the moment.
Hopefully one day.
Yes, I think sort of when I've got a little bit more time, which I would like to do, and maybe give my own readings of some of the lesser known Tolkien works.
Yeah, that sounds like a great idea. Hopefully one day, you'll have time to do that.
But at the moment, I'm idealistically more writing.
Of course. Okay, so we're approaching the end of our interview, and we would like to ask you a couple more questions about Poland, because maybe our listeners don't know that, yes, but you will be visiting Poland as a special guest for the Pyrkon convention in Poznań in June. Our podcast team will very sadly not be there, because we're actually all going to another Tolkien convention in Germany. It's called Tolkien Tage. It's happening at the same time. So we've planned it in advance, so well, sadly not, but there'll be lots of other fans, of course, to meet you there. Have you ever participated in such conventions before? And what did you think about them? And how do you, in general, feel about, conventions where you can see so many fans of Tolkien gathered together, sharing this, passion and love that we have?
Well, I'm extremely excited to be going to the convention, and I'm very, very grateful to my publishers for setting it up. So it will be my first time visiting Poland, so that's very exciting as well. I've only been to these events in Britain, so I've been to the Tolkien Society conferences and also what they call their Oxmoot, which is a regular meeting. So I'm very much looking forward to meeting. This sort of convention is huge. So it's sort of
yes, indeed, it's huge, and there's a lot of cosplay and other activities around. But it's like a whole city living that. Yes,
it'll be great fun. So I am very much looking forward to it. And I would say that if any of your listeners are going to be attending, please come up and say hello, because I'm sort of keen to meet people and to find out what they think about the book and and about Tolkien in Poland. So
absolutely, we will definitely be mentioning it on our social media and reminding people and encouraging them to talk to you. So I'm sure there'll be lots of fans and readers of your book willing to meet you.
And I'm more than happy to sign things or to provide any sort of comments or interpretations, thoughts about questions they have.
Great.
And are you only coming to the convention itself, or are you staying a bit longer? Because it will be your first trip to Poland?
Yes, the publishers have very kindly arranged some interviews. So I'll be doing some media before the convention. I'm just very sorry I won't be meeting you there as well. But anyway,
we know it's a pity that those conventions happen at the same time. But on the other hand, it shows how popular Tolkien is nowadays. That there's so many events going on in Poland, in Germany, all over the world. So that's amazing.
It's great. It's very good.
So maybe before we wrap up, Ola, you can show the Polish edition of Professor's book.
Yes, give me 1 second.
Okay, yes. And how actively, because you mentioned you take part in translations to other languages, not in the Polish case, but with other, do you actively participate?
That's the funny thing. It's all arranged by the publishers.
Okay.
So there's no active participation by me at all.
Okay.
It's all done independently. Having said that, there is an audio book. So there's a recording of my.
I listened to the English version and Maciej as well.
It's beautifully read.
I agree.
By a very well-known actor. For that, I did have to provide pronunciation files. for many of the words. That was quite time consuming. Doing it over one Christmas, and to make sure that he was pronouncing not just the names of Tolkien's places and characters correctly, but also they wanted guidance on the pronunciation of Anglo-Saxon as well. So I had to provide about nearly 100 audio files, I think it was.
Oh,
right.
That's and then you need some time per recording then to master it as well. So yeah, indeed, it's time consuming.
Yeah, it was a steep learning curve.
Okay, so I have the Polish copy of your book right here.
Oh, right. Okay.
You can see it's green and it has this gold font that shines.
That's really good.
It's really beautiful.
It's the green, because I have it in the room as well. The green is more like lively, or it's because here it's a bit darker. But
no, they've got a picture as well.
Yeah, your picture, and this is the media support, and this is actually me, pointy-eared. So I had the honor of providing media support about your book, and I have this very precious copy because I got also sent like a pre-book just for my reading in my review, and it's very unique because you can see that it says Tolkien in the 19th century. There was like a mistake in printing, and there's only a few copies.
I have the proper one.
Yes, yeah. Obviously, in the original, it's correct on the 21st. But
that's great. That's really
I have this very precious copy that is in the 19th century, and we had some laughs about it. That Tolkien's impact on the 19th century. Well, he was born. Okay.
That really is a sort of that'll
Easter egg story.
Yeah, so when I hope that when I meet my publishers in Poland, that I'll be able to take a copy back. I'm sure there are some waiting for me in England.
Absolutely, yeah.
But it's one of those sort of strange things. Being all the way over here in Macau, it's easier to send things to Britain than it is to send them to.
Yeah. Okay, I think now it's time to wrap up our interview. So once again, thank you so much, Professor, for joining us. It's been an honor. It's been a fascinating conversation.
Well, thank you. I'm very grateful for you to have invited me, and I've really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you from our side as well. I also really enjoyed the conversation.
So thank you once again. That is the end of today's episode. Thank you very much for your time at the Green Dragon Inn, and remember, we are waiting for your comments and questions, and don't forget to click subscribe and like buttons on our channels.
Notes and other materials used in this episode can be found in the description of the episode on our website. There, you can also find our Tolkien collection, a full, very rich library of books and other media we use to create podcasts.
In the next episode, of course, we're going back to talking about The Lord of the Rings and discussing it with you. So see you in the Green Dragon Inn next week.
And as Gandalf said, may the wind under your wings bear you where the sun sails and the moon walks.